Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to part 2 of me reading creepypastas. Quick correction from last time. At the beginning, I said I would be reading my creepypastas, implying that they belong to me. Obviously, they don't. I might write and post some of my own original creepypastas in the future, but for the moment, I am simply reading others' works that I particularly enjoy. So, now that we got that out of the way, on to part 2 of the Creepypasta series by Eric Dodd. Storage by Eric Dodd. Your Honor, I've seen some shit that would turn you white. A quote from Winston from Ghostbusters. There's not a lot of work out there for a 20-ish ex-security guard with a bad case of PTSD. And if that dumb kid was hideously scarred by a serial killer that had carved a swath of victims across 3 states and disappeared without a trace, that kid can barely get a hamburger at McDonald's, much less gainful employment. My parents weren't able to help much. The wounds on my forehead and cheeks healed after a few weeks, or months. I wasn't counting. You can still see them if you look closely, or in moonlight. Nobody looks too closely these days. There's something about my eyes that seems to reflect the things I've seen. I can identify with Winston. I've seen some shit. And that shit would turn you white, if not stark raving mad. And I may in fact be mad because I keep seeing shit. After the incident, I spent a few days in the hospital and a few weeks in the psych ward. They assumed I'd suffered a psychotic break due to trauma or shock. And since most of my story did in fact sound like delusional ravings, off to the pretty pastel room I went. Life went on, the university reopened for classes on schedule, and the cops eventually stopped questioning me. I went home and sat on the couch for a few weeks, and gradually got the sense that my parents wanted me gone. I seemed to make them nervous. I seem to make everyone nervous now. Tempers flared, words were said, and the next day I was on a bus to somewhere, anywhere. I had about $1,000 in savings, plus my dad had stashed another few hundred in my bag, so I was able to rent cheap rooms and eat cheaper meals along the way, but I knew I would need to find a job soon. I'd been traveling in a vaguely southern pattern, and I finally ended up in a bus station in a town on the outskirts of Birmingham, crouched in between the off-ramp to I-65 and a storage facility. I would say it was an industrial district, but it seems that Birmingham is entirely industrial district. The place had the charm of a 3-day dead whore, and smelled like one as well. Walking outside the bus station and past the chain-link fence encircling the U-Store facility, I noticed a dingy, yellowed hiring sign in the window. What the hell, I thought, and pushed the dust-hazed door open and went inside. The manager's name was Al, but he looked nothing like my scrawny old ex-coworker. Al was a morbidly obese man with a gap between his 2 front teeth and a Cher t-shirt that looked as if it had been new in the 80s. You got ID, you got no needle holes, you don't stink like booze, and you even got a fucking resume. You must be my fucking gift from God. You're hired. You start right now. You got a place to stay? No, sir. Good, that's better. You stay in the apartment upstairs. I pay you $8 an hour for 40 hours a week. If you work more than 40 hours a week, pretend you're paying me rent. You're off on Mondays and Tuesdays. If you want health insurance, you can call the fucking president, 'cause I ain't seen mine yet neither. Al took me on a tour of the facility. The U-Store was much bigger than it looked, consisting of 12 buildings arranged inside a square security fence. Each building had 4 stories above ground and 2 more below ground. The lowest levels were premium rate and surprisingly well secured, with motion sensors and video cameras at every hallway intersection. Motion sensors are a pain in my dick. They go off if fucking moth flies down the fucking hall. But we still have to check the video and log it. The job was pretty much the same security job I was used to. Work an overnight shift, 9 p.m. to 6 a.m., walk the perimeter twice, check the storage buildings once, pick up any trash, then go back and check the alarms and the video log anything out of the ordinary, and investigate as needed. Mostly, you just keep your mouth shut and let the customers alone. They're paying our bills, so you don't need to do what they're fucking in their unit. Which might, in fact, be fucking. Al laughed. If a customer gets loud, makes a scene, or especially if they fuck up the facilities, you call the cops first and me second. Al wrapped a metal storage unit wall, which echoed beamingly down the hallways. These walls are pretty strong, but you can punch a dent in one with your fist and a knife will poke a hole in it. Nobody wants to rent a unit that's all dented up and the walls are a bitch to replace. We had been walking the security circuit with Al pointing out each checkpoint, and we had reached an entrance to the high security section. Customers take the elevator, they gotta put their code in to get the elevator to show up, and they gotta put their code in again to go down to B1 or B2. Really fucks them up. They get confused and some of them will panic inside the elevator, so you gotta keep your radio on you at all times. Eventually they'll hit the intercom button and call you, and you gotta explain to them they gotta put the code in again. For us it's the stairs, because I hate those fucking elevators. Al swiped his badge and swung the heavy door open to the stairwell, and we walked through, and I froze. It was the same stairs. How could it be the same stairs? I stood there, tiny breath whistling in my throat, hand locked in death grip on the cold steel railing. Hey, you okay? You having a heart attack or something? I blinked. It wasn't the same stairs, not at all. These were new, shiny steel, brightly lit, and I could see the bottom. No, sorry, I thought I had to sneeze. I was waiting for it. Yeah, fuck. All the fucking dust in here, wait till spring, and it's like fucking yellow snow all over. High security, or HS, was similar to the higher levels but more brightly lit. The units were larger, so there were less of them. Wow, it's cold down here, I said. Yeah, we keep it at 50 year-round. We got some law firms keep their papers in here, and don't tell nobody, but we got some government agencies that do the same. We keep it cool and dry, and their papers will stick around forever. Got some customers that keep art down here and antiques and shit like that, Al said. The door to HS area was car width, and looked to be made of sturdier stuff than the flimsy sheet metal of the less expensive units. Can people store cars down here, Al? I asked. Nah, no way to get them down. Building 3 has a ramp and a loading dock for cars, but most people don't want to store them in these buildings. Regulations says you gotta drain them of oil and gas and any other fluid, which makes them a bitch to get into the units. Regs say no explosives. Remember that, kid. You see some dumbass storing his lawnmower and the gas can, you log it and you tell me. We continued touring the HS levels, B1 and B2. Al pointed out the security cameras at each intersection, at the midpoints down the halls, and showed me where the security route would take me. Don't always walk the same route. That'll drive you nuts. Mix it up some, and make sure you tag those checkpoints, Al said. We made it back to the office, and Al took me upstairs to a small apartment. It was a little bigger than my dorm room in college, with a small kitchen, shower, bed, closet, and a TV. Al pointed at the TV. That might have cable. It ain't supposed to, and I ain't never seen a bill, but I won't tell if you don't. Okay, kid, you better get some sleep. You're on shift at 9. If you're later I catch you sleeping, you're out on your ass. You get people wanting to rent a unit at 3 a.m., they're idiots trying to rob you. Tell them the office is closed at night. Al squinted at me. You know how to work a gun? He asked. Yeah, my dad taught me. Is this that bad of an area? I asked. Ah, shit, no, kid. You might need to show the gun some tweakers, but that's about all. The glass is all bulletproof, and those are steel, solid doors. If some junkie's fucking with you in the office, there's a gun under the desk. It ain't loaded, but there's clips in the bottom drawer if you need 'em. He looked me directly in the eyes. And if you do need 'em, you don't need 'em. You need to call me on the radio, which is what you'll do. What about inside the facility? I asked. You're inside a highly secured, state-of-the-art storage facility with a radio and keys to nearly 1,000 steel doors. I bet you could figure something out, Al replied. He left me, and I took my duffel bag up to my room and tried to sleep. The first night was uneventful. So was the next, and the next. Weeks passed, and I began to feel better. I got into the swing of being a security guard again, which is mostly looking for differences. I recognized the patterns of U-Store and its customers. The late-night crowd was usually pretty quiet except for Thursday night band practices. Some kids had gotten the bright idea to rent out one of the cheap ground-level units and store their musical instruments in, and they practiced every Thursday night. I didn't mind, they weren't that bad. About once a month on a Wednesday night, there was a porn shoot in one of the units. I wasn't very clear on what was going on until I mentioned it to Al the next day. A long black limo pulled up about 11 p.m., and several stripper-quality girls got out, followed by a few guys. They'd all trooped down to one of the larger high-security units, and they'd pack up and be gone before dawn. "We rent the units," Al said. "So long as they're paying and not breaking the units, we don't say a word." Most of the customers weren't like that, though. They were regular people moving stuff around, up late because they had to work and couldn't move during the day. I saw guys fixing cars, a woman who used a large unit as her extra closet full of clothes, and a couple who were building a baby crib. They had a full woodworking setup inside their unit, complete with dust suppression and built-in vacuums, but mostly it was people moving boxes of stuff in and out. Everything was going so well for maybe 6 weeks, and then I saw it. I saw her. I had become accustomed to these false alerts from the motion-sensing cameras, especially in Building 8. The building was close to the highway, so I suspected the sensors were falsing due to the road vibrations. Once or twice a night, usually in the long stretch of dark between 3 a.m. and dawn, I'd hear the beeping from one of the mini cameras in B1 or B2 in Building 8. I would put down my book, acknowledge the alert, write FA, false alert, in the logbook, and glance at the long, empty, bright-lit corridors on the monitor. It was early on a Wednesday morning, the beginning of my week, and I had been playing a game on my DS when the alerts went off. I sighed, put down my DS, I reached for the logbook, and noticed something in the monitors from the corner of my eye. I looked up and saw in the middle of a brightly lit hallway a small shape. I leaned closer and hit the camera controls to switch to a closer view. Standing in the middle of the highly secured, brightly lit hallway, 2 floors underground, was a little girl in a bridal gown. "What the I started to say, and the girl's head snapped up toward the camera, her black eyes staring at me through the monitor, as if she had heard me. She lifted a finger to her lips and ran off screen. I frantically thumbed through the camera views, but could see her nowhere. "Screw this," I muttered to myself and grabbed my flashlight and the gun from the holster under the desk. I bolted out of the office door, pausing only to make sure it was locked, and started running down the paved alley leading to Building 8. At this point, I wasn't thinking of anything supernatural. I was thinking of the scumbags who made porn movies in my facility, and thinking that maybe a little girl had escaped something really awful, or was still involved in it. I called Al on his radio as I ran. "Al, wake up. We got an intruder in Building 8. Repeat, intruder in Building 8. Wake up!" Al lived nearby within radio range, and he mumbled something about being on his way. I banged the main door to Building 8, flung it open, and ran across to the stairwell. The panic, which hadn't returned since my first day, hit me like drowning in an ocean. I stopped, backed up, and shut the stairwell door. I didn't have time for this. I ran to the elevator, punched in my override code, and stepped inside, punched in my code again, and rode the slowest elevator in the world down to B2. The gently playing Muzak version of Cher's Believe did nothing to make my situation better. I cautiously stepped into the corridor. I'd kept the gun in my jacket pocket, not wanting to spook anyone, especially with a kid involved. I walked down the hallway and found nothing. Turned at the end, down the next hallway, and still nothing. No locks out of place, no units opened, no sounds, no smells, nothing. I checked the stairwell, nothing. I gritted my teeth and walked up the stairs to the B1 landing. Looked out the door and found nothing. By this point, I was hoping I would find anything, a shoe, a body, hell, a whole murder scene, but there was nothing. My radio crackled and I jumped and bit my tongue. "I said, where are you?" Al's voice grumbled over the radio. "B2 in Building 8, south stairwell," I said. "Found anything?" Al asked. "Not a thing. Sorry, man, it's probably a false alert." "Hey, it happens. Just once, though. Maybe back at the office we'll check the tapes." "Roger," I said into the radio. I sighed and walked down the long hallway to the elevator. I checked the remaining hallways, retraced my steps to the elevator, and punched in my code. As the elevator door opened, I thought I heard a sound, a girlish giggle. "God damn it," I said. I punched the cancel button. The elevator door slid open, and I stepped out, and quickly looked both ways. There, to my left, a gauzy white shape disappeared around a corner. Another giggle. I looked up at the security camera, pointing at it, and then pointed in the direction of the corner. Holding my flashlight like a club, I jogged to the corner and quickly checked both ways. Nothing, of course. I ran as fast as I could down the long corridor to its end, turned and saw nothing. Ran to the intersection. Nothing. To the next intersection. Nothing. To the end. Nothing. Finally, wheezing out of breath, I yelled, "Okay, you bastards, I give up. Enough of you for the night." Al was at my desk when I got back. "Enjoy the exercise, kid?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm trying out for the Olympics," I replied. "Maybe the Special Olympics. I just watched you run 2 miles inside Building 8 for no fucking good reason," Al said. "Figures," I said. "So you saw nothing? On any of the cameras?" "Not a thing." Al made me sit through repeated viewings of the security tape. He made it a point to show me pointing at the camera from all angles, each camera showing a bright, empty hallway. "You sure you're not on anything, man?" Al asked. "I swear I saw something," I said. "Chill, man, this is me fucking with you, I believe you. It gets late here, you see shit. Stare at those screens long enough to not see anything, and your mind will start adding shit just 'cause it's bored. I've seen shit too," Al said. "Yeah, like what?" Al shifted in his seat. "Never seen a girl. Saw a dude walking down the hallway once. Normal-looking dude walking around like he was a customer. But that console there shows door accesses, and it hadn't gone off in a while. I thought maybe some asshole was trying to live in one of the units, which is against regs. It happens sometimes. I checked it out, and there wasn't anybody there." Al reached into the micro fridge under the desk and pulled out one of his favorite lime sodas. "That wasn't the worst, though," he said, cracking open the can. "I saw blood once. A whole lot splashed around all over the damn place. I used to take those damned elevators, and one time, ding, doors open, and..." He took a deep swig of his drink. "I just stood there. The door closed, I coded it again, and it was gone. I know it wasn't real. I've been working about 20 hours straight. I just figure something didn't want me riding in the elevators no more. So I don't." It got worse after that night. I can't help but think that my pursuit and my taunts woke something up. Or maybe something recognized me. Afterwards, I had company every night. The still, sterile mood of the facility from before had changed, grown lower, grown mean, like it was lying in wait. When I made my rounds, I could hear footsteps behind me or down adjacent hallways. I heard faint voices as well, muttering and whispering from behind the cold steel doors of the storage units. The upper units were the worst because they weren't brightly lit all the time like the high security units. The upper level lights were motion sensitive and on timers. They would turn on when you entered the hallway and turn off when you left. Several times during my rounds, those lights would flick on at the opposite end of a long corridor only to flick off again a few seconds after. One night during my first round, I was walking the dim asphalt paths between the building. I turned the corner and standing before me was a girl. I jumped back in shock. The girl uttered a short squeak and stopped. "You scared the hell out of me, you asshole," she said. "Aren't you supposed to be using that flashlight?" "Sorry, it ruins my night vision," I said. "I didn't mean to startle you. I wasn't expecting to see anyone out here." I recognized her. Her name was Jen. She was the bass player for the band that practiced in one of our units. She had long, straight black hair, and several piercings glittered in the moonlight. "I was on my way to your office," Jen said, "so I'm kinda glad I ran into you. I'm sorry I snapped at you earlier. It's just, I can't find Lewis anywhere." Lewis was the gorgeous and talented singer for the band, and, to my deepest regrets, her boyfriend. We had a fight and he stormed off like the chicken shit that he is. I can't find him now. We walked back to the building that housed her band's storage unit. "If he's in the facility, he can't have gone far. Your access code will get him to the main level of this building, but he can't go anywhere else. The elevator takes a code he doesn't have, and the stairwell doors are locked too." The other band members were in the storage unit, rolling up cables and packing gear. "Did you find him?" asked the short, stocky drummer. "No," I said. "How long has he been gone?" "About an hour now," replied the drummer. "I tried calling him, but I get shit for signal in here." "Not like he'd answer anyway," said a tall, skinny kid who was packing away a guitar. He looked at me and said, "Ah, that's a cool tribal, man," pointing at the scar on my face. "It's not a tattoo," I said, not wanting to get into the meet the freak with customers. "Will you guys focus?" Jen said. "Right," I said. You guys stay here in case he comes back. I'll sweep this floor, and if I don't find him, I'll check the video back at the office. I left and checked the entirety of the ground floor. For good measure, I checked the upper floors as well, knowing there was no way he could get up there. I went back to the band's storage unit. "Did you see anything?" Jen asked. "No, and he's obviously not coming back here. I'll check the videos," I said. The band members decided to go home except for Jen, who insisted upon going through the video footage with me. "Look, there he is," she said. "I see him." The monitor showed Lewis leaving his storage building right after Jen said he stormed off. Lewis stood by the door smoking for a few minutes and then turned his head sharply to the right as if he heard something. Then he threw down his cigarette, walked down the asphalt path, and out of the view of camera. "Where did he go? Quick, find him on one of the other screens," Jen said, rubbing her hands on her leggings. I toggled through the video feeds until I found Lewis again walking down the path. He stopped, looked back, and then turned again and started walking. I switched the feeds again and found him walking towards Building 8. "Aren't those doors supposed to be closed all the time?" Jen asked, pointing at the dark spot on the gray and white screen. "Yeah," I replied, as Lewis paused before the open door, the black threshold leading to Building 8, and stepped inside. I toggled through the feeds again until I found one for Building 8. I could only see his silhouette as he walked down the hallway, pausing occasionally to look around, and finally, as he pulled open the heavy, magnetically locked security door to the stairwell. He stepped inside and pulled the door closed behind him. "Shit, that's bad," I said. "Those doors are magnetically locked, and they can't open unless you have a badge or a code." Jen shook her head. "It sure as hell opened, though. You saw it." I switched the feeds again, catching a glimpse of Lewis in the stairwell, switched again until I saw him walking down the bright corridor of the B2 level toward the camera, toward an open storage unit, door rolled up and yawning open like a black eye socket of a dead thing, or a mouth. I saw the pale blob of Lewis's face glance up at the camera, then whip back to focus on the darkened doorway. His eyes widened, his mouth opened in a silent scream, and his figure jerked forward into the storage unit. The heavy door rolled down and slammed shut, leaving the camera staring blindly at the pristine, empty hallway. Jen stared at the screen, mouth slightly open, eyes wide, bulging, ringed in the black of shock that no amount of makeup can match or mask. "Go get him!" She grabbed my shoulder with hands made of musician strong. Squeezed. Hard. "Go get him now!" I grabbed the pistol from its holster, dug the 2 clips out of the bottom desk drawer. I toggled the radio. "Al, come in. We've got a problem. Wake up! Al!" I shouted into the radio as I ran. The radio screeched static and white noise. "Al, I need you at work. Big trouble." The radio hissed and popped and abruptly turned off. The night seemed alive as I ran to Building 8. The trees outside the facility swayed in a brisk wind, their leaves clattering like faint mocking laughter. I felt eyes on me, and the sense of things around every corner waiting. My scars began to lightly itch, as if I had run through cobwebs. I reached Building 8 to find the door tightly shut and locked. As I badged it open, I heard a scraping noise from behind me. I turned, hand on the pistol, to see Jen. "Is that blood?" she asked, pointing at the small spatter of spots on the floor just inside the door. I tapped the spot with a shoe, smearing it. "And it's too dark to tell from here. It could be motor oil, something like that. Look, you shouldn't be in here. Go back to the office until I get back." "No way, I saw the tape. I saw what happened to Lewis. I'm going to get him, and you're going to help me. Now." She pushed past me and started walking down the hall to the elevators. "Help me get this open." I opened the elevator and we stepped inside. I thumbed the security code and pressed the button for B2. "Stay behind me," I said, drawing the pistol. I had no idea what was going to happen, but I've played enough video games to know that a monster jumps out of the elevator as soon as the door opens. I heard a faint click, and I looked over to see Jen holding a small handgun. "My dad got this for me last year. He was nervous about me hanging out downtown. Took me to the shooting range for a few months." She passed a shaky hand over her face and through her hair. "Why the fuck is this happening? What the fuck is happening? And why aren't you scared?" I snorted. "I'm terrified. I just peed on myself a little back there in case you didn't notice." The elevator door opened and chimed. "As for what's happening, I don't know. I have an idea, though, and I don't think it's good." I stepped into the corridor, checking both directions. The long white hallways were bright and quiet. I slowly walked down the hallway towards the storage unit where we had seen Lewis. At the corner, I saw a faint reddish-brown smear. A fingerprint or a thumbprint, as if somebody had paused here, touched the wall for support. Jen stared at it for a moment but said nothing. I turned and continued down the hallway. There was a small spattering of blood on the floor in front of the storage unit. "It's padlocked," I said. "There's no way he could have gotten in there, shut the door, and locked it from the outside." Suddenly, my scars began to itch and throb deeply like acid on my face. I drew in a breath, and the lights went out. Jen screamed, and I heard a pop and a click and a clatter, and then the lights came back on. The padlock was lying on the floor, in front of the storage unit. The bright, sterile white fluorescence at the far end of the hallway went dark, then the next set turned off, and the next, the darkness growing closer to us in sections. A whispering, muttering sound filled the air. We unconsciously moved closer together and back towards the metal door of the storage unit. The lights went out again, and the darkness rushed in like some eager fluid. Jen and I stood in the whispering dark, pressed together like orphaned children lost in an abyssal world from an untold amount of time, until the red emergency lights flicked into murky life. Their blood-red glow did not so much illuminate as it did accentuate the shadows that pooled and swirled around us. The whispering grew louder and louder like a river of mumbling, tumbling voices until it reached a roaring crescendo and then stopped. The storage unit's door slowly rolled open. Lewis was there, sitting on the floor. He was facing away from us, crouched and still. "Lewis!" Jen exclaimed, and tried to run forward. I grabbed her arm. Lewis spoke, his voice somehow terrible, drifting up and rattling around the steel walls. "They made me come here. They want people to know. They made me see." He made a deep, sobbing, choking sound. "I didn't want to see, but they made me." My eyes, slowly adjusting to the light, began to make out the shapes in the storage unit stacked against the walls. Lewis's arm reached out to the nearest oblong, shrouded shape and then pulled. It tumbled to the concrete floor, making a horrible, dry, husking sound as it hit. A desiccated, shriveled arm fell out of the shroud. Lewis began to stand and began to laugh. He turned his mangled face toward us and stared at us with deep, black, gouged-out sockets where his eyes had been. "They showed me! They made me see, but I don't have to see anymore!" Jen shrieked and recoiled into the hallway. I had the gun trained on Lewis, its grip slick in my sweaty hands. The whispering roar was back, the rattling steel walls and doors. With a sickening lurch, I realized that all of the unit's doors were sliding up, and their neatly stacked contents were all falling, sliding and tumbling to the floor. The sticky, sweet stench of decay that the state-of-the-art ventilation system had masked so well before was now overpowering, filling the air. "Bodies! They're all full of bodies!" Jen screamed, hands on the side of her face, eyes huge and shining in the red light, wrenching her black hair gun forgotten on the floor. I grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her once. "Run!" I shouted, and dragged her away from the bodies, down the corridor, trying desperately not to hear Lewis's mad laughter. I tripped over a smaller corpse sprawled in front of the unit near the corner, and slammed into the opposite wall. I looked down for a moment and saw a white bridal veil covering a small child's withered corpse. I shook my head and staggered to the stairwell door. The whispering was now a full roar, rage-filled voices howling, shaking the security door. I fumbled my badge twice, finally got it, punched in the code, and hauled open the door. I grabbed Jen by the arm and dragged her up the stairs. The lights in the stairwell were all wrong, flickering and tilting crazily. I realized my face was wet as I reached the B-1 landing. There was not much of a ground-level landing left. As Jen and I crawled out of the stairwell, we saw that most of the U-Store facility was gone. A few portions of the building were still standing, but we were otherwise in a field of desolation and destruction, as if the whole block had been mulched. Later, I learned that even though tornadoes were common for that area, the one that leveled the U-Store facility was uncommon in both its fury and its brevity. NOAA reported a small, high-intensity cell appeared directly above the storage facility at about 6:30 a.m., spawning a slow-moving tornado that rated as an F3. The tornado encompassed the storage facility and stayed in effectively the same spot for a full 15 minutes. until moving in a generally northeast direction for about a mile. It appeared to have left the ground for most of its travel, touching down once again in a neighborhood in the northeast of the U-Store, before dissipating completely at 7:30 a.m. They found Al's body, or the remains of it, in the top of a tree 2 counties over 3 days later. The coroner report stated Al had died of heart failure. It appeared he had a massive heart attack before the tornado got him. Officially, the U-Store facility was being used for illegal storage of corpses that were to have been cremated or buried by certain unnamed funeral homes. The fact that those funeral homes were never officially named, and the case was quickly filed away in the darkest, dustiest cabinets available in the Birmingham Police Department, did not make the news. Of course, the scariest part about the whole situation seemed to me to be the way that even after the freak tornado revealed thousands of unidentified corpses stacked like cordwood inside an absurdly well-secured and well-cooled storage facility in a relatively large city, people just seemed to forget about it, as if they wanted to forget, or didn't want to know. I didn't see Jen again afterwards. The cops were initially very interested in me, as I apparently was the only living employee of U-Store Inc. that they could locate. They kept me in jail for nearly a week without pressing charges before I started making noises about an attorney. For the first few days I was completely fine being behind bars. Those bars would keep things out as well. I overheard them say that Jen had been committed to a psychiatric ward due to her story, and her insistence that her boyfriend was trying to kill her. She had become violent and attacked one of the officers questioning her. Lewis was never found, neither was his body. The other thing I overheard, the thing that made me decide to leave the jail, was about U-Store's owners. It seems there weren't any. The whole operation was owned by shell companies, and the cops couldn't track down the original owners. Eventually, they stopped looking. I knew that somewhere, some person or some group of people arranged to have that facility built and to have it equipped for a specialized purpose. I knew that someone had to be responsible for those bodies being there, and I suspected that someone was responsible for those bodies being dead in the first place. Thousands of people disappear in this country each year. I may have found some of them. What keeps me awake at night, more than the dreams, or the sounds outside my window, or the itching of my scars, is wondering how many more storage facilities are out there.